All right, well, welcome to our weekly meeting for our container security group. There's no other way to start this meeting other than saying congratulations to the team for getting the alert dashboard out the door and shipped. I'm super excited to see that happen. It's just a huge story. It was top of the release post. It was, got mentioned all over the place. It's going to add value to our container networking story, and it's going to provide a good foundation for us moving forward as we move other kinds of alerts into that dashboard. So, yeah, congratulations. It's great to have that out. We can start getting customer feedback. I am fully expecting usage to be fairly low of it right now and into the near future, just, because there's a lot to set up and, we don't have a ton of customers using network policies as of yet, but that's okay. It's okay to start small and, we'll have that come in and we're only going to expand that in the future. So I'm excited to see the growth of that one.
It was the very first feature mentioned in the release post. It was like the first paragraph.
Right at the top.
Yeah.
So just so the team knows next steps, I'm working to update our marketing collateral. These are things that the engineering team usually doesn't see, but like we have a slide deck that I'm updating. I want to update the demo video that I did for the eBPF summit and edit it a little bit and add this onto the end, because it's nice to see those in GitLab instead of off in Kubernetes. And then lastly, I'm going to work with Wayne to figure out what usage metrics, and Lindsay's going to help me on this one, figure out what usage metrics we can get today. And if we need to have a separate issue for engineering to implement those, we will. But I'm crossing my fingers that some of that data will just be there for us without any extra work. But we'll investigate that first before taking the engineer's time. All right, so this next one, Lindsay, you volunteered me for
I did.
a walkthrough. If it's okay, I would like to move that to the end just because
that's fine.
I want to make sure we get through everything else.
And I know it's related to year number 4 around the second epic. This is just one.
It is.
Taking it a step back and looking at it at a higher level.
Alexander, it wouldn't be a weekly group meeting if you didn't have something to demo.
Certainly not. I just want to say that I got the event counter column into the alert details. So with the alert details page, if you remember, we sort of got the counts for free with all the work there, but now it is added to our list. So you can see how many there are.
Awesome. Thanks for getting that through. That's helpful for sure. It's easy to see at a glance that we're aggregating them now. So that's great. That was going to be a big pain point as we observed in Zamir's demo, right? To have all of those alerts streaming in. So huge usability improvement. By the way, I'm excited. Side note, the Linux Zoom app finally added the reactions button for me. So I have not been able to see any of your reactions until now, and it's great. I can now do reactions and see all of yours alongside you. So
awesome.
Off topic, but coming back to the main thing there, I believe we've got an epic ready for planning breakdown. Last week we did the first epic in our DAST policy work. I believe the second epic is ready as well. Let's deep dive into that one, and then we'll come back to the walkthrough of everything we're doing with the DAST policy work, so it's recorded. But in this one, this will just be an extension of the MVC, so it'll come after the MVC. And this one should be fairly straightforward. In fact, I think I only have one requirement in there. All it says is users will be able to create a policy in the security policy project that will require a DAST scan to run according to a daily or weekly schedule. So in the MVC, we were letting it run as part of the pipeline. For this next step, we want to extend that to let users schedule this on a daily or weekly basis. So that would be the only change for this epic. There shouldn't be any UI changes for this, some documentation updates, but otherwise everything will stay the same from the MVC. Are there any questions about that one, or do we feel comfortable moving it to the refinement workflow stage?
Just a question about we are now going to be based on the base, and is this configuration already available on the security policy? Because you mentioned that there is no UI requirement for this.
Yeah, so this is not in the database. This is going to be stored in a separate security policy project repository as a YAML file. So we would just be extending our support for the type of YAML that you could put in there to define a job that runs on a daily or weekly basis. So that's why there's no UI, is because it's all in that YAML project.
Okay, thanks for the answer.
Yeah, no problem. All right, well, I saw a yes from Tiago. Unless I hear other dissent, I'm going to go ahead and move this to refinement.
Well, we need to create implementation issues off of this that will be refined. I know that this process is working a little bit different within container security than Threat Insights, and I'm not sure quite if we've solved how to represent that. In Threat Insights, we've had design issues that we're assigning to DRIs to create those implementation issues. In this case, how do we want to have front-end and back-end implementation issues created that can then be refined?
I suspect there might not be front-end for this,
Oh,
Lindsay.
correct. Sorry. So just the back-end issues that need to be broken
Yeah.
down.
So, and with the design issue, then we won't have or also don't need one.
Sure.
I was just going to slap Jan as a DRI on this one and have him.
So just mention in the epic and ask that way.
He's probably watching this now.
Feeling a little beat up. Okay. So Sam, can we wait till those implementation issues have been created to change the state? Because this really is still the planning breakdown piece of it.
Sure, that's fine. That might be.
I mean, as soon as those are
doing it, but either way, I don't.
Samir, why is this so funny?
The way Sam replied was awesome. It's like, oh, that's fine.
I mean, but it really is the actual planning breakdown. It's actually the breakdown into issues that deliver the feature.
So I just thought that the planning breakdown was making sure that the requirements were clear, and then creating the implementation issues was part of refinement. But if I'm splitting hairs here, I mean, either way.
Whichever, as long as we know the process that works for you guys. And it sounds like Tiago just described it. So he's going to mention someone on here to get the backend issues created.
Okay. All right. So this last one that Lindsay volunteered me for, it's a great idea. Thanks for suggesting this one, Lindsay. I went through kind of.
I have to admit that
we've had a lot of changes in this area.
Yeah, before you jump in, Sam, given that the front end has been focused on alerts and it's hard to follow this many conversations at once, I got a ton out of that description that you gave to us yesterday. And I apologize that we didn't just record it yesterday so that we could have shared it then.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be fair, we've had a lot change here on this epic. I can't even begin to speak to the magnitude of back and forth and change that we've had. So where we've landed is a 7-step process, and I'm going to share my screen and walk through this. So the very first step is going to be creating a separate project, very much like how GitLab Managed Apps version 2 works today, where you have a separate project that's linked to your main project. For the sake of this narrative, I'm going to call it the production project. So you have the production project and your security policy project. Those get linked together in that first iteration. Just to show what this will look like in the UI, we will be adding a new navigation item on the left-hand side for policies, and we'll let you pick a project. This will be any project at all. There's no restrictions there. It can be the same project. You can have multiple policies point to the same project. It doesn't really matter if that project then has a YAML file in the right location. that YAML file is going to control what policies get applied. So it's a very minimal step, a minimal iteration to get things out the door. With this first pass, we're only going to be supporting DAST policies running in the pipeline, and only at the project level. So we're not doing group or workspace level yet. All of the permissions for this will be managed in that security policy project. So if you want to limit who is able to edit that policy, you go over to that security policy project, you go to your users page, and you add and remove developers and maintainers to set it up the way you want it to work. One of the big value propositions of this first iteration is letting security users manage these policies separately from the developers who own the production project. They want to set these up and be confident that they're in place and know that, you know, no developer can come along and intentionally or more likely accidentally change it. And right now that's the case with the GitLab ci.yaml file. Developers have access to edit that. Even using code owners, you can't fully lock that down. And so it's just too easy for someone to come in and, you know, change DAST to DAST enabled to true, or sorry, DAST disabled to true, which would disable the DAST job. Having it in a separate policy or separate project lets them separate out those concerns. Now, one of the challenges here is that these DAST policies are going to be referencing profiles that are stored in the database. And those profiles are set up in the security and compliance on-demand scan area. So again, in order to enforce that complete separation of duties where developers are not able to just to get rid of those scans, anytime a profile is in use by a policy, we're going to just take the easy MVC route and make it not editable at all. So the only way to edit or delete that policy would be to remove that profile from all of the policies in your organization. And at that point, you would then be able to edit or delete the profile. So it's probably not the best solution, but it's a fast and easy one that lets us make sure that we have a separation of duties, and we can always iterate on that in the future. Tiago.
There's been there's some discussions in the chat. I just thought it'd be nice to verbalize them.
Oh, thank you.
Alexander, I think you're talking about the menu where the menu was saying policies to rename it to scan policies. Was that it?
Yeah.
Right.
That's all I want to say about that.
So I'm fine with that. I don't know if Annabelle got back to you on that one or not, but I think she would be the DRI for that naming.
Yeah. That can come out in, we can continue with the planning breakdown, right? Asynchronously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Just reach out to Annabelle to confirm on that one.
So.
Yeah, and then I was wondering if it was scan policies versus execution or results, but then you could use one and have tabs, but Annabelle, I think, is the answer.
Yeah, so right now it's just DAST scan execution policies. So if we want to get that specific, we certainly could. But yeah, whatever Annabelle decides to name that.
Yeah, just looking at avoiding changing the menu name twice. It probably makes users get lost and frustrated.
Yep, and good call out, right? Like with this first MVC, we are going to have two separate policy areas in the product. It's not ideal, but it's good for the MVC, and we're going to clean it up later. So you will have policies here, and then you'll also have your policies on the threat monitoring page under the policies tab. So it temporarily will be in two places. All right, any questions about that first iteration or the second iteration that we just talked through? So the third iteration, we want to start implementing some of the functionality that users have in their repository in the UI, with the ultimate goal of hiding away that security policy project. In the end, users should not need to think about where their policies are stored or how all of that is managed. Like it shouldn't matter to them if it's in the database, if it's an Elasticsearch, if it's in a repository, if it's just files on our file system. Like, all of that really needs to be transparent to the end user and not something that they have to think about and worry about as they're setting up these projects. Now, getting there is going to take some time. So iteration 3, we're going to start implementing our UI editor for this. We're going to still let users view the security policy project repository. They'll still manage their permissions there. But we do want to start implementing a UI way for them to edit that YAML file. So that's where this prototype comes into place. At this point in time, we would be getting rid of the policies tab under the threat management page, and we would be merging that with the policy, merging those two together so that it's all in one place. You'll have your container runtime policies for your container network policies and scan execution policies for this, this approach. For this third iteration, I guess I should say, we're only giving them YAML mode. So there will be no rules mode as part of this effort. It'll just be YAML mode only to make it simpler. Back to my iteration plan. So after that, we want to provide for a better approval process in the UI. This again will be a pretty minor change, but in the list of policies that you get on that page, we want to also show policies that are in a pending approval state. So instead of enabled, disabled for status, you'll have a third option here of pending approval. And what that'll do is it'll pull any MRs that are in that project and it'll display them as pending approval policies here. And if you click on any of those, it'll take you to that MR. So again, it's sort of an intermediate step to start providing some UI around that approval process. The fifth iteration will be to show the policy history. So, another benefit of having it in this repository in GitLab means that we get for free today the ability to go back and see all of the edits to those policies over time. So if we're going to hide this project away, before we do that, we need to preserve that functionality in our own UI. So this piece is not designed yet. This is one of the things that Annabelle's working on right now, but identifying how and where in this UI do we let them see the history of changes that were made, who made it, who approved it, what was the YAML at that point in time. And then in our sixth iteration, I think at that point in time, we'll have enough functionality in the UI that we can start, we can actually hide away that security policy project entirely and have users use the UI only to manage these. This will involve a migration because they have all of these projects set up that are visible. And right now they have full control over that repository. So in order to take away some of that control, we need to do a migration so that we don't mess something up in the rest of GitLab or in their project. If they're using that project for something else, we don't want that to negatively be impacted.
Just to interject quickly, Sam, because migration can be a loaded terms for backend engineers, we're always thinking of, when you say migrations, we think of DB migrations. Mm-hmm. What's happening there is the contents of repository needs to be migrated to a repository on a new hidden project. So
yeah, that's
that migration may include some database migrations, but it's mostly about getting things from one repo to another repo. Yes,
exactly. Yeah, you're right. It may involve some database changes, but we're not really talking about a database migration here, because we're using this repository as our database, essentially, right? We're using this to store the policies. So in pre-migration, just to get into the details because we have time, we were allowing users to have extreme freedom with this security policy project. They could have multiple production projects that pointed at the same security policy project. In fact, this production project A could even point at itself as its own security policy project. And so if we're going to hide this away, we can't just go hiding this. We don't know what else is in that project. We don't know what, we have to be really careful with that. So instead of hiding this project, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new project with the YAML file from your original project and hide the new project away. So it's new. We know that the only thing in there is the YAML file that we copied over. We can safely hide that and start actually managing that, for them rather than giving them full freedom. Although this does take away some capabilities for them, it gives us the ability to provide a better user experience because we have control over that project now. So we can actually govern how things work in that project. Part of that governance is going to be changing the way that permissions work. Previously, users will have had to manually add everyone that they wanted to have access to this project, and now we're going to start automating that, which especially for organizations that have thousands or tens of thousands of projects, that's a really important step because it's not going to be scalable for the application security team to go in and add the proper developers and maintainers on all of their different security policy projects. So this new model says that anyone who is a maintainer on your production project automatically gets developer permissions on this hidden security policy project, and anyone who's a developer gets reporter access by default. So we'll have to implement some sort of synchronization mechanism there, where if a maintainer is added or removed here, it automatically adds or removes them as a developer on this new hidden project. These developers and reporters will have the ability to propose changes to the project, but they will not have the ability to merge them in. So we'll set up this hidden project as a project that has a protected master branch by default so that only maintainers can merge in. And then these maintainers will be decided by an organization-wide list of security approvers. So this will be some new UI that we add in at this point in time, where GitLab administrators can go in and define that set of users who are their security approvers, and those approvers will then become maintainers by default on all of the security policy projects that are hidden.
And another interjection there, something that we discussed was we're not looking to add a new role to GitLab's existing list of roles. So
Correct.
even though security approvers looks like a role from a user perspective, it's not a good choice to go embedding that as an actual role in the models, in the existing models. That's far too complicated to go in there. We don't know where it's going to go. So the best choice there is to do something on the side that acts like a new role, but it's not.
Yeah, we could easily burn the entire team working for a year to add a new role into GitLab, I'm afraid. So yeah, that's a good call out. Thanks for that, Tiago. From a developer perspective, it's not a new role. Just think of it as a new capability to define a list of security approvers that become maintainers on these projects. So this iteration 6 is kind of the big bullet to bite. That's going to be a big one. And then after that, we get to iteration 7, which just adds in the rules mode to the policy editor. So both rules mode and YAML mode are available. I stopped there. Certainly we want to keep going. After that, we're not going to stop. We're going to be doing things like adding support for SAST and the other scanners. We're going to want to up level this and allow users to define these policies at the group and workspace level. And we're going to want to add more types of rules. So we want to add scanner results policies and other things, but all of that is down the road. We're not worrying about that right now. For the immediate time period, we've got this seven iteration breakdown that we're going to work through. And once we get through that, we'll kind of pick up our head and go from there. Any other questions on that?
I have a question. I was thinking that initially, let's say that the user creates a new policy, and then we are going to trigger a new repository, right?
Mm-hmm.
And let's imagine that the user is able to see that there is a repository created over there. So then he can either choose to maintain on their own or automate. Let's say that the user might have a couple of APIs that they do a couple of things here and there. And then over time, we are going to remove it.
Mm-hmm.
And more than remove it, we are going to kind of remove the access to the project itself. We're going to create a new way. I was wondering if in between these stages, would it be possible for us to get some feedback from the users? Because I noticed that from a couple of projects that I'm working with, people sometimes just reviewing MRs and things like this. People always try to do CI first, and looks like that's kind of a culture that users are kind of excited about it. So I'm just concerned that we are going to add a lot of complexity by hiding something that maybe the user actually wants to have it. That's my only thing there.
I'd like to add a disclaimer, Sam, that I did not speak to Zamir about this.
That's okay. No, I think
Zamir, sorry, let me tell Zamir what the private joke is. I was talking to Sam about this yesterday, and I was talking about this more or less the same thing. Say, hey, we're giving users a text area in the UI, but that is not the same as having a Git repo that you can push to and script and do other functionalities. So sorry, Sam.
Yeah, I think almost all of the developers have raised that question in one way or another, at least all of the backend ones, right? So the trade-off with all of that freedom is that we're losing some of the control. And so it's harder to provide a clean user experience. I don't think that we need to remove the ability to use Git to push and pull and commit things from that repository necessarily. The areas that we have the most conflict with are some of the project settings, including like the permissions. So, maybe there's a way to still let users have some access to the project, but not full access, or maybe command line access, but not access in the UI. We're also looking at maybe offering a way to optionally show the project, but as soon as you show the project, then the permissions become really complicated, because if they add a developer here, does that mean it goes and adds a maintainer on this other project too? And so now you're talking about a two-way synchronization. And so showing the project has a lot of complexities with it that I don't know that we'll want to take on. At the same time, I think, we may be able to still let them use this via Git as an API, essentially, if they're wanting to work in that way.
Have you considered at some point to have like kind of two options, a manual option, so the user can have the full GitLab experience, that the pieces are like, you can piece the pieces together, or you can have an automated mode that then it would fit in more in your workflow? You think it would be like counterproductive to have that?
Yeah, so like I said, we might default to hiding it, and maybe later on we give users the ability to unhide it or to show it. But like I said, that gets tricky, because then you have to deal with that two-way synchronization potentially, or it gets a little bit tricky. So we'll have to work that out. I know we're at time, so we've got to drop for our retrospective meeting, but short answer is yes, we are thinking about that. I don't think that's a decision we have to make now anyway, though. We can start with these first iterations and figure that out.
I was going to say that if we can stay open to that possibility, it'll be good, because there are other things that you can do showing the project, but taking away some of the permissions in the project. For example, you hide the members and disable. So there are ways to play there. It will all depend when we get to the nitty-gritty of refining and figure out how we're going to do these. But yes, we got to go.
All right. Thanks, everyone. If you have more
Thanks a lot.
questions, please send them async.
Thanks.